Welcome, dear reader, to a realm where morality wears the mask of a porcelain puppet, where salvation is measured in severed flesh and screaming sinews. Tonight, we descend into the mechanical depths of the Saw franchise, a series that has carved its name into the very bone of modern horror. But this is no simple journey through blood and viscera. No, what awaits us is far more insidious, a philosophical labyrinth constructed from rusted iron and human desperation, presided over by a dying man who believed he could resurrect the dead souls of the living. The fluorescent lights flicker. Somewhere in the darkness, a tape recorder begins to whir. And in that moment, everything you thought you knew about the value of life is about to be tested. Beyond the blood, the architecture of terror, let us first address the obvious. The element that has seared itself into our collective nightmares, the traps. Oh, those magnificent instruments of agony. The reverse bear trap, with its medieval jaws primed to split a skull like overripe fruit. The needle pit, a writhing ocean of syringes waiting to pierce flesh in 10,000 places at once. The Venus flytrap, that grotesque marriage of dentistry and damnation, ready to tear a face apart from the inside out. These devices are not merely tools of torture. They are sermons delivered in steel and suffering. Each gear that turns, each blade that descends, each lock that clicks into place, these are the syllables of Jigsaw's gospel. They speak of waste and redemption, of squandered opportunities and second chances, purchased with pieces of yourself. But here's the terrible truth that keeps us watching, that keeps us returning to these blood-soaked chambers time and again. The traps are not the real horror. They are merely the stage. The true nightmare unfolds in the desperate calculations of the human mind. In that endless microsecond when the victim realizes they must mutilate themselves to survive. The traps are terrible, yes, but the choice is eternal. What would you do? This question doesn't merely haunt Jigsaw's victims. It haunts us, the audience, safe in our seats, yet somehow complicit in the suffering we witness. We lean forward. We hold our breath. We imagine our own hands reaching into that acid bath, our own teeth gritting against the pain of self-amputation. The films transform us into unwilling participants, forcing us to confront the dark arithmetic of survival. How much of yourself would you destroy to preserve the rest? The profit of pain. Understanding John Kramer is not your garden variety monster. He doesn't lurk in summer camps, wielding a machete with mindless fury. He doesn't haunt your dreams with a razored glove. No, John Kramer is something far more disturbing. He's a believer, a zealot. A man who looked into the abyss of his own mortality and emerged with a twisted theology of suffering. Imagine it, a civil engineer, a man who spent his life creating structures to house the living, receives his death sentence. Terminal cancer, inoperable, irreversible, but unlike most who receive such news, Kramer doesn't rage against the dying of the light. He doesn't sink into quiet despair. Instead, he has an epiphany, dark and absolute as a collapsed star. He looks around at the world, at people who sleepwalk through their existence, who poison themselves with drugs, who betray their loved ones, who lie and cheat and steal without consequence, and he sees the greatest sin imaginable, waste, the waste of life, the squandering of the miraculous gift of consciousness, of breath, of beating hearts and functioning limbs. And so, John Kramer decides to become a savior, not a murderer, mind you. Never a murderer. This distinction is crucial to understanding the labyrinthine logic of Jigsaw's philosophy. In his mind, he doesn't kill anyone. The traps don't kill. The circumstances don't kill. The victims themselves make the choice to live or to die. He merely provides the opportunity for rehabilitation, for redemption, for rebirth through agony. Live or die, make your choice. 6 words. 6 simple, terrible words that strip away all the comfortable illusions we maintain about free will and fate. Because here's the genius and the horror of that statement. It's true. The choice exists. The key is always there. The escape route always possible. But the price is calibrated to break not just the body, but the spirit itself. The sermon of sin. Jigsaw's moral calculus. Let us examine the theology of John Kramer more closely, for it is as intricate as it is insane. Each victim is selected with surgical precision, chosen not randomly but for their perceived moral transgressions. This is not arbitrary violence. This is Judgment Day, executed with mechanical precision. Consider the unfaithful spouse, locked in a device that will tear them apart unless they can confess their betrayals, each secret ripping through their lips like broken glass. Or the insurance executive who denied coverage to dying patients, now forced to navigate his own nightmare of impossible decisions and calculated cruelty. The drug addict who wasted their body's potential, now crawling through razor wire to reach salvation. The corrupt cop, the unethical doctor, the abusive parent all find themselves in Jigsaw's confessional, where absolution comes only through blood. The traps themselves become allegories, nightmare parables that mirror the victim's sins. A man who faked disability to collect insurance must navigate obstacles that would challenge even the able-bodied. A woman who pretended to be a victim must experience real victimhood. A liar must choose between truth and death. The symbolic weight of these tortures is no accident. Jigsaw is nothing if not theatrical. A showman presenting elaborate morality plays for an audience of one. But here's where the philosophy grows. Truly dark, who is John Kramer to judge? What gives this dying engineer the right to play God, to determine who deserves rehabilitation through torture? The films never let him off the hook for this hubris, but they also never fully condemn him. Instead, they present his twisted logic and ask us to grapple with it. Because, and here's the uncomfortable truth, some part of us understands his rage. We've all felt that fury when we see privilege squandered, potential wasted, second chances thrown away. We've all wished, in our darkest moments, that we could make the ungrateful appreciate what they have. Jigsaw takes that universal frustration and weaponizes it, transforms it into an ideology of agony, the genius of escape. Hope as the cruelest torture, what separates Saw from mere torture porn. What elevates it to the realm of philosophical horror is this: the games are winnable. Every trap, every test, every nightmare scenario comes with an exit. The key exists. The combination is knowable. The path to salvation is there, visible, tangible, real. This is the masterstroke of Jigsaw's design. Because hope is the cruelest torture of all. Imagine you're in a trap. The timer is ticking. The mechanism is active. Death approaches with mechanical inevitability. But right there you can see the key. It's in the acid bath, or behind your eye, or embedded in your cellmate's stomach. The way out exists. You just have to reach for it. This is where the films achieve their most profound psychological horror. They force us to confront the gap between our imagined courage and our actual will to survive. We all like to think we're heroes in waiting, that when push comes to shove, we'll do whatever it takes. But would we really? Could you saw through your own ankle, nerve by nerve, bone by bone, while your foot screams in protest? Could you plunge your hand into a pit of used syringes, feeling hundreds of needles pierce your skin, searching for one specific syringe among thousands? Could you sacrifice another person, perhaps someone you love, to save yourself? The beauty and terror of Jigsaw's games lie in this terrible certainty. You'll never know until you're in the trap. And by then, it's far too late to prepare. The breakdown of civilization, group dynamics in Helbert Jigsaw's philosophy extends beyond individual torment. Some of his most elaborate and most revealing games involve multiple victims forced to cooperate or compete for survival. These scenarios expose not just individual cowardice or courage, but the fundamental fragility of human society itself. The nerve gas, House from Saw 2, remains perhaps the franchise's most brilliant social experiment. A group of strangers wakes in a sealed environment, slowly poisoning them. Antidotes exist, scattered throughout the house, but they're limited. The solution is obvious. Work together, share resources, ensure everyone's survival. But that's not what happens. Oh no. Instead, paranoia blooms like toxic mold. Trust dissolves. Alliances form and shatter. The strong prey on the weak. Information becomes currency, hoarded and weaponized. Within hours, these ordinary people who in their normal lives probably considered themselves good, moral individuals transform into something primitive and vicious. They lie, they steal, they kill. Jigsaw doesn't force them to turn on each other. He doesn't need to. He simply creates the conditions: scarcity, fear, desperation, and human nature does the rest. It's a bleak, cynical view of humanity, suggesting that civilization is nothing but a thin veneer over our savage core, ready to crack the moment our survival is threatened. And perhaps most disturbing, he's not entirely wrong. History is littered with examples of how quickly social bonds disintegrate under pressure. The Lord of the Flies isn't just fiction, it's prophecy. Jigsaw simply accelerates the process, compresses years of deterioration into hours of pure survival horror. These group traps serve another purpose in Jigsaw's twisted pedagogy. They force victims to confront not just their own failings, but their interdependence. A businessman who built his empire on exploiting others must now depend on those he would normally dominate. A woman who lived selfishly must now consider others' needs. The games become laboratories for examining the social contract, testing its limits. Watching it snap the uncomfortable mirror, self-reflection through horror here. Where the Saw franchise transcends its genre trappings and becomes something genuinely thought-provoking. It holds up a mirror to our own lives, forcing us to examine uncomfortable truths about how we live. Do we appreciate our lives? Truly appreciate them? Or do we sleepwalk through our days, numb to the miracle of consciousness, taking for granted the gift of health, of mobility, of breath itself? How many of us waste hours, years on meaningless pursuits, poisoning ourselves with substances or attitudes, squandering the limited time we have? Jigsaw's question isn't just directed at his victims. It's directed at us, the viewers, sitting comfortably in our theaters or living rooms. We might not be adulterers or drug dealers or corrupt officials, but are we living fully? Are we grateful? Do we treat our lives with the reverence they deserve? And here's the truly uncomfortable part. Most of us probably don't. We scroll mindlessly through social media. We numb ourselves with entertainment. We postpone our dreams, waste our potential, take our loved ones for granted. We're not living, we're existing. And in Jigsaw's philosophy, that's the greatest sin of all. The films force us to ask, what are our moral failings? We all have them. What would our trap look like? What specific torture would Jigsaw devise to address our particular brands of waste or cruelty or weakness? The fact that we can imagine our own personalized nightmares speaks to the universality of guilt, of knowing we could be better, do better, live better, but damned. This is crucial. The films never suggest that Jigsaw's methods are justified. They present his philosophy, make it seductive in its terrible clarity, but ultimately reveal it as the delusion of a dying man trying to impose meaning on a chaotic universe. The horror isn't that Jigsaw might be right, it's that he might be just slightly, uncomfortably close to something true. Even as his methods are monstrously wrong, the corruption of legacy. Apostles of Agony, John Kramer's death doesn't end his influence. In fact, it reveals perhaps the darkest truth of his philosophy. Ideas, once released into the world, take on lives of their own, often becoming twisted beyond their creator's recognition. Enter Amanda Young and Detective Hoffman, Jigsaw's disciples, each carrying forward his work but warping it through the lens of their own damage. Amanda, once a victim who survived her trap, becomes the zealot, the true believer. But her faith is corrupted by her own psychological wounds. Where John designed escapable traps, Amanda creates certain death. Her tests aren't rehabilitation, their execution dressed as mercy. She's lost in her own despair, in her nihilistic certainty that people can't change, that everyone is as broken as she is. Her traps become expressions of misanthropy, not misguided mercy. She represents the danger of ideology taken to its logical extreme, where the method becomes more important than the message, where the ritual of suffering eclipses any possibility of redemption. Amanda doesn't want to save people. She wants to prove they can't be saved. Her version of Jigsaw's philosophy is like fundamentalism, rigid and absolute, and ultimately more about the torturer than the tortured. Hoffman, meanwhile, reveals the ease with which noble intentions, even twisted ones, can become simple tools for evil. He uses Jigsaw's methods not for rehabilitation, but for revenge, for eliminating enemies, for personal gain. The elaborate moral framework becomes window dressing for straightforward murder. He's the ultimate hypocrite, hiding his selfish cruelty behind the mask of righteous judgment. Together, Amanda and Hoffman show how any ideology, no matter how specific, can be corrupted, weaponized, turned into something its originator never intended. The symbol of Jigsaw becomes a franchise within the film's universe, a brand of terror that anyone can adopt, each putting their own spin on it until the original message, if it was ever coherent, becomes lost in a maze of competing interpretations. This evolution mirrors real-world extremism, how revolutionary ideas become authoritarian nightmares, how religious movements splinter into violence, how philosophy becomes justification for atrocity. The films suggest that perhaps the real trap isn't the mechanical devices, it's the trap of ideology itself. The seductive certainty that you alone understand how the world should work. The question that echoes judgment and justification, so we arrive at the central question, the one that pulses beneath every frame of every Saw film. Are Jigsaw's games a valid test of character, or merely the sadistic fantasies of a dying man desperate to feel powerful one last time? The films, to their credit, refuse to provide an easy answer. They present the horror in all its visceral detail, make us feel the terror and the pain, but they never fully condemn or condone. They leave the judgment to us. the viewers, to wrestle with in the darkness after the credits roll. On one hand, there's something seductive about the clarity of Jigsaw's worldview. In a universe that often seems random and meaningless, where bad things happen to good people for no reason, where justice is rare and arbitrary, John Kramer offers something different. A world where actions have consequences, where moral failings are punished, where everyone gets exactly what they deserve. But that seduction is itself a trap, isn't it? Because who decides what people deserve? Who determines the appropriate punishment for moral weakness? And what right does suffering confer? Is a person who survives torture automatically more worthy than one who doesn't? Does pain really teach lessons, or does it simply traumatize? The films hint that Jigsaw himself is aware of these contradictions. His philosophy isn't coherent, it can't be, because it's built on the shaky foundation of one man's pain and rage and terror at his own approaching death. He's not a philosopher or a saint. He's a dying engineer who couldn't accept the randomness of his cancer, who needed to believe there was still something he could control, some way he could matter. His traps aren't about saving people. They're about saving himself from meaninglessness, from insignificance, from the terrifying possibility that his life and death don't matter at all. Every victim who survives validates his worldview. Every failure proves his point. It's a closed system, self-reinforcing, impossible to falsify. It's not philosophy, it's pathology. And yet, Dan single quotes to we all, in some small way, understand the impulse. Haven't we all wished we could force change on others, make them see what they're throwing away, shock them into gratitude and awareness? The horror of Saw isn't that Jigsaw is a monster, it's that he's human, all too human, taking universal frustrations and magnifying them into nightmare. The lasting scars, why Saw endures 15 years after the first film, with more sequels and prequels than anyone expected. The Saw franchise continues to fascinate. Why? What is it about these films that keeps audiences returning to Jigsaw's playhouse of pain? It's not just the gore, though the inventive brutality certainly plays a role. It's not just the twists, though the film's labyrinthine plots and reveals have become legendary. No, the enduring power of Saw lies in those questions, those uncomfortable, unavoidable questions that the films thrust into our minds like so many rusty hooks. What do you value? How much is your life worth to you? Would you have the will to survive? And perhaps most importantly, are you really living or just existing? These questions don't have easy answers. They can't be resolved with a quick Google search or a philosophical treatise. They require deep, personal reflection. They demand that we confront our own mortality, our own choices, our own potential for both courage and cowardice. The Saw films are modern morality plays, dressed in the aesthetics of extreme horror. They belong to a long tradition of art that uses shock and discomfort to provoke thought, like the grotesque paintings of Hieronymus Bosch, depicting hell in meticulous detail to inspire fear of sin, like the Grand Guignol Theatre of Paris, presenting shocking violence to make audiences feel alive, like the horror fiction of Edgar Allan Poe, exploring the darkest corners of human psychology. Saw takes this tradition and updates it. For a generation that has become desensitized to conventional horror, in an age of endless media consumption, of real-world horrors broadcast 24/7, the films needed to go further, dig deeper, make us feel something in our oversaturated souls. And they succeeded, creating a franchise that has influenced an entire generation of horror filmmaking. But beyond the influence on cinema, The films have entered our cultural consciousness in deeper ways. "I want to play a game" has become a sinister catchphrase. The image of Billy the puppet, with his vacant eyes and spiraling cheeks, is instantly recognizable. The concept of the saw trap has entered our vocabulary, shorthand for impossible choices and cruel dilemmas. The final turn of the key. Conclusions in blood as we emerge from this deep dive into the mechanical depths of Jigsaw's philosophy. Covered in the metaphorical blood of analysis, what can we conclude? The Saw franchise is a contradiction, which is perhaps why it's so compelling. It's simultaneously profound and shallow, thoughtful and exploitative, philosophical and sadistic. It asks important questions while wallowing in gore. It presents itself as having something meaningful to say while acknowledging its own exploitation of violence. John Kramer is both prophet and charlatan, visionary and madman, righteous avenger and delusional killer. His games are both tests and torture, rehabilitation and murder, meaningful and meaningless. This ambiguity isn't a flaw, it's the point, because life itself is ambiguous, isn't it? We all face impossible choices, ethical dilemmas, moments where our values are tested. We all struggle with meaning and purpose, especially in the face of death. We all wonder if we're living fully or just going through the motions. Jigsaw's traps are extreme, theatrical versions of the choices we face every day. How much are we willing to sacrifice for what we claim to value? Do our actions match our stated beliefs? Are we brave or cowardly, generous or selfish, strong or weak? The difference is that most of us never face such stark tests. We live in the comfortable grey areas, where our failings don't have immediate, visceral consequences. We can be petty, selfish, wasteful, without having to saw off our own feet. And maybe that's for the best. Civilization, after all, is built on forgiveness and second chances, not on brutal meritocracy of survival. But sometimes, in our honest moments, we wonder if we were tested. Truly tested, would we pass? Would we have what it takes? And that wondering, that uncertainty about our own capacity for survival, for courage, for sacrifice, that's the real horror Saw plants in our minds. The clock stops, a final word, so here we are. At the end of our journey through rust and razors, through blood and bad choices, through the Cathedral of Suffering that John Kramer built as his monument to meaning. The tape recorder has stopped. The timer has reached 0. The trap has either opened or closed, depending on the choices made. What have we learned? That horror is most effective when it asks questions rather than providing answers. That philosophy and violence make uncomfortable bedfellows. That the line between salvation and torture is thinner than we'd like to admit. That we are all, in our own ways, in traps of our own making, though most of us are fortunate enough that the keys are easier to reach and the prices less steep. The Saw franchise will continue to evolve, to spawn new sequels, to find new victims and new tests. But the core questions will remain the same, echoing through time like the sound of that bicycle bell, like the whir of that tape recorder, like the tick of that ever-present timer. Live or die. Make your choice. The game is over, but the questions remain. And somewhere, in a darkened room lit only by flickering monitors, a puppet's painted face grins knowingly, patient as death itself, waiting for the next player to wake up and discover that the game has just begun. The choice is yours.